The conversation continues. Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Dismuke, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, lead writer on Captain's Log RPG, in addition to other Star Trek fiction and other fiction. Here, you can always see all my stuff at michaeldismuke.com, ever growing the portfolio. And of course, my portfolio is not the only one that's growing. Let me talk to you about Jim Johnson.
I had a moment.
You killed that whole drum roll by drinking water at the exact moment.
Sorry. Hey, everybody. Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG, and also some other stuff, Modiphius, that you'll be seeing in coming months and years. Also got my own fiction going on. Got some other projects in the hopper that I'm working on. You can find me at scribingnetty.com. You know where to find me if you've been watching the show for a while. Social media, Discord, et cetera, et cetera. No surprise there. I've been a co-host on this here show for 4+ years, which is awesome. The conversation continues. We keep finding more and fun new things to talk about: RPGs, Star Trek, writing, the combination of the three, and then more stuff besides. And we have an awesome guest with us tonight. He's no stranger to this show, so I will have him introduce himself anyway and give him an opportunity to plug any cool stuff that he's working on. So Josh, please introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks a lot. I'm Josh Allen. I am a contributing writer to Captain's Log, which I'm very grateful. Really fun to work on that product. Outside of that, I'm just a regular guy, but I do play in Michael's Star Trek Adventures campaign online, so I'm very familiar with his storytelling structure. And then outside of that, I'm kind of a forever GM. So I run Star Trek Adventures, run other RPGs, playing both purchase content and also my own.
Yeah, Josh is always humble, so I have to say he is the visual guy. I mean, he was brought into Captain's Log, for anyone who's watched the show, is because of his ability to create flow charts and simplify the game. He's fortunate to have two young sons in his RPG crew. So based off what he learned, we dragged him in and his talents to help take Captain's Log to the next level, and it really has become one of surprisingly popular books that Modiphius has come out. So thank you, Josh, for that.
That's amazing.
All right. One of the other things myself and Josh have worked on together is a workshop. We actually did a workshop last year, 2024, at Big Bad Con in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was a hit. It was a really, we took everything we knew about how we design dramatic stories for RPG. We turned it into a workshop, tested it out, and we were so thrilled with the results that we've talked for months about bringing it to continuing conversations. So if you have your pencils and paper ready, or if you have your computer notepad, we're going to give you some tips and tricks tonight about how to design your own RPGs. Anything you want to say about it, Josh, before we jump in about the workshop?
Yeah, I just so appreciated, I think one of the things we were able to do there is talk about how not to railroad. So it's kind of that classic dilemma that GMs have. You can always make a great story in your mind, but then how do you make it come alive? And it was just really cool to see people coming with all their different writer's block questions and really wondering what kind of things to fill in. So I'm just thinking back to some of the great stuff they came up with, but don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We can surface some of those stories as we get through the outline.
Yeah, what's interesting, in the past couple of weeks, we've had some great writers come on focused on storytelling. And so we are going to be a little different because we're talking about storytelling for RPGs tonight.
Cool. So I have a question for you. This is the first I've seen the outline, or the first time in a long time. That is, I know we looked at it a long time ago, but just one question for you. If you are already going to answer this, in the course of your discussion, just say so, and we'll move on. But is this, designing dramatic stories for RPG? Is this for the game master to be prepping ahead of time, or is this something for the game master to do in the moment with their players and saying, "Hey, we're going to do Star Trek. Here's the inciting incident. Let's go." And then you just started designing on the fly, where are we kind of starting here?
Great question. This is definitely with the idea behind almost like the mission briefs that
Mhm.
you have kind of your own little mission brief ready to go. And to Josh's point, we're not talking about railroading them. You have enough flexibility built in that you can still have a framework for your dramatic RPG story, knowing that we know players will take it wherever they want to go.
Yeah, yeah. And so broadly, then just thinking about, I was thinking more about prep time. Like your average game master, are they putting in 15 minutes or 15 hours? Like what kind of prep time are they putting into your concept here that we're going to be discussing?
I'll take that one. I was thinking about that when we went into the workshop because I had no idea what systems people were going to want to play. I have personally found Star Trek Adventures and any 2D20 system to be very easy to prep for. Whereas if I'm writing the same exact story for something like Dungeons and Dragons, not, I love D&D, but it takes a lot more, like there's a lot more math you have to do, etc. I would say that this is really like laser focused on the distilled structure of the story, and it was amazing how far we got in just a couple hours there in that room. So you could just take 2 hours, 1 hour, and you would be so, ready for the big themes, the characters, the threats, the twist, even some of the twists and turns that you might even want to foreshadow. And it would just serve you no matter what system you were using and what other prep work you had to do. This would just be a great backbone.
Okay. So with that in mind, are we taking your guys' framework for designing story and adapting it specifically to STA, or are we talking about the broad overall thing, and then people can go apply it to whatever they want to?
It was broad. It definitely was broad because people came in. We had probably about 25 people in the class, I
Yeah.
think, and 25 people in the workshop. And many of them were playing different systems or creating their own systems. So this was a very broad class that can, of course, apply to STA.
And I would say, I mean, Michael, I know you were talking about your own fiction. Jim, you write fiction. Like this is also just for the writers out there. Like it is for RPG. I feel like this could work with Star Trek Adventures. It could work with writing your own novel. It could work with your own Captain's Log, solo RPG. If you wanted to kind of sketch out a structure real fast, even randomizing some of it, it would sort of overlay onto many of those activities.
Nice. Okay.
So what we're going to do, since the workshop was 2 hours, and of course we have limited time on the podcast, we're going to break it into two halves. So we're going to have it this week, and then our next show we'll finish it off. But we're going to share the points that people can go through, and it's really interesting how applicable this is. And hopefully one day, if we do the workshop again, some of you listeners can join it and go through the full experience with us.
Cool. All right. Well, good. Well, so to kick it off, then I think it would make sense for both of you to take a turn and just tell us a little bit about your history of storytelling with storytelling, like what made you a storyteller, and then what brought you two together to decide to even make this course in the first place. And Michael, I don't care who goes first, just one of you.
Josh, go ahead.
Sure. I feel like I started with RPG, to be honest. When I was a kid, my friends and I would just make up campaigns. We barely used anything that we bought out of the store. We just sort of made stuff up on pen and paper. Really enjoyed that. Kind of set it aside for many years, and then took it back up when my kids were getting into RPGs. And since then, just had so much fun coming up with story ideas that either mesh with things that my kids like, or playing online with folks. That's really stimulated me. Playing by post has really kind of like, I feel like unleashed the would be writer in me. I always wanted to be a writer. I never really got the chance to do it professionally until you guys let me contribute to Captain's Log. But when you play by post, you're kind of micro dosing creative writing, and it really, before long, you've written novel after novel's worth of content, and I think that's really what kind of incubated that sense that that I had a little bit of stories to tell in me.
Yeah. For me, my storytelling starts with actually my mom failing to ground me successfully, because she would put me in my room to ground me. And she said she swears there's a cast of characters in there, because I would just be in there playing by myself, role playing. And so she had to ground me by actually making me sit next to her with my hands on my lap, not moving or touching or talking or anything. And that's torture for me, right? Because I was always making sound effects and stuff. But then I discovered RPG at age like 14 or 15, and then that was the rest of the story. Once I saw that I can get my friends around and we could collaboratively storytell, and of course over the decades it has refined and refined more into an art form, which is now become a part of a career too, and I do a lot of storytelling at work and help people find their stories. But definitely RPG is the sweet spot because I get to see how other people react to the same problem, which is always different, which is always rich, and which is always so beautiful, for someone like me who likes to capture characters and stories.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Nice. Okay. Then last question before we jump into your course here. Then, so obviously we're talking about storytelling, novelists, writers, whatever. There's all kinds of different ways of telling a story, whether it's a stage play, teleplay, movie script, RPG, dialogue, audio plays. I mean, there's so many ways to tell a story. But yeah, as we've talked about on the show many times with other writers, writing an RPG module is a very different form of storytelling because by and large you now this may be separate from your course, but by and large you don't know who the characters are going to be, right? You might be writing to archetypes, like the captain, the first officer, the medical officer, but you don't know the character, you don't know their values, you don't know who they are, what they are. You're just assuming that the GM and the players are going to bring in those characters and add another element to the module that you're writing that you can't possibly know. So what's the difference then, in your opinions, between just like raw storytelling, like writing a novel where you know literally everything, and building an RPG module where you may not know who's going to show up?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. A little bit will be a little bit we'll talk about that in point number 3 about how to get a fire under people, because characters have motivations and players may not know their motivation yet coming into the game. So that is one thing you have to be ready, is like you have to be ready to give them their motivation, and find many ways to do it, because some characters won't react to one thing. So you kind of have to be super creative when designing an RPG module with motivation. What else, Josh, do you think is different about?
Yeah, I think some people are in unique situations where they may, like in an episodic RPG like SPA, you sort of can, you can have a baseline of who your player characters are, and then as you construct the next arc for your campaign, you can actually draw from that knowledge and even, make some of the acts that we'll get into and some of the incidents really relate to their backstories. Otherwise, I do think that you do kind of have to create, I mean, one of the themes through this is you have to create some hooks that are a little bit flexible, things that you can nudge this way or that, you can have a picture in your mind, but make it blurry so that, when someone comes along that really fits the bill, you can kind of resolve it to something that really relates to that character, because they have so much more investment if you can make it really call to their own characters and the stuff that they've contributed.
Yep. Good points. And I think one of the things Dayton Ward said on one of his previous interviews with us too, Jim, is it was such a transition for him, huge novelist for 20 years, to all of a sudden go into designing an RPG and not tell the ending, to let the players decide the ending. So that's another, when you're designing an RPG, you are not deciding act 3 or the conclusion. They are going to have to really write that after you've compiled all these problems for them, which we'll talk about how to do that.
Okay, great. Well, that's the extent of my questions. So I think where you guys want to just jump into your outline, go for it.
Yeah. So, Josh, why don't you give it a start? Maybe give it all the high points that we're going to go over the next 2 episodes, and then we'll jump into it.
Thanks, Michael. Sounds good. And I should say, this is, Michael, you put this framework together. So I just want to give credit here that that as I go through these, this is really a structure that I think you've used in many domains, even professionally, and it's adapted to RPGs really well here. So I'll go through the basic points. So this was kind of what we took the audience at the workshop through. Basically, starting with point 1. I think there's seven steps here with different activities in each step, but the first step is actually to start at the end, and we'll explain how this squares exactly with what Michael just said about you can't really know what Act 3 is going to be like. But at the same time, our exercise here has you start at the very end and picture that outcome. And we'll talk about in detail what that can do for the rest of your story structure. Then breaking the story into 3 acts that you think might make sense with a different sort of tenor to each act. Kicking it all off by figuring out what is the inciting incident. So this would be step 3. What's the inciting incident that's going to lead your players into the story? Then starting to erect barriers. So this is step 4, where you come up with the conflicts and what Michael calls the brick walls that they're going to come up against as they go through the story. Step 5 is to really bring things to their lowest point. So basically make things as bad as they possibly can, hitting the end of Act 2 from a place where the players are then going to have to kind of scramble back from rock bottom there. And then step 6 is working on ways that the players can resolve the situation to a solution. Step 7 is to go back through with your structure in mind and imagine the different bits of foreshadowing that you are going to need to really help ground the story and kind of bring the themes and elements that you want just continually throughout the story that you're telling. And then, we had one section at the end to just kind of cover any tips, tricks, and Q&A. We'll go through each of these sections now, but anything you wanted to add there, Michael?
No, that sounds really good. I know we have some closing tips and tricks that we always share, at the end. So we'll make sure to have those next week ready for people. And again, people have your pencils and papers or your notepads ready because these are kind of cool. And for me, it was just really fun in the class to watch these people playing all these different RPGs, creating their own. And the most exciting one, which I'll say just now, just to show people how powerful this is, there was somebody who created an RPG about baking cookies. And it was in my opinion, the best one out of it. People were laughing because she really applied the principles. I was like, oh my goodness, you just invented a new RPG that you must get out there. So these are, again, they seem simple, but if you play along as we go through these, you might be surprised with what you have by the end.
And I'll just say, listening to your outline and then just reviewing it because we've got it up here on screen. If anybody wants to follow along, specifically for STA, grab a mission brief or grab one of our standalone adventures. You can follow the format. We got Perfect. You'll know the end goal. You got the 3 acts. You got the inciting incident. You'll get some notions for conflict. I mean, all these pieces are in here. So, are in the mission briefs and in the standalones. So, I don't think we need to pick one to be a model. Just say, pick any of them and just kind of like listen to us and listen to Josh and Michael, and then kind of like look at the source material and apply it. Of course, there's tons of other references out there that you can look at too, but for the purposes of this one, anything should work STA related. All right, you guys want to jump into the first one then? Knowing the end goal from the start, always a classic.
Sounds good. So yeah, I'm happy to start with this one. And this is the one where you basically start at the very end. It typically involves imagining what the threat is that's going to face your player characters, and then imagining them triumphing over that threat. Picture in your mind what that final outcome is, and you can be specific in your mind here, or you can be vague, but you have to know that when you actually get into the game, you're going to need to be open to this playing out in a different way. But by fixing, I should say, this outcome in your mind, it's going to help you build the structure that's going to add drama, because this is about designing dramatic stories. So the dramatic part, it has to come in the form of these big swings. So I like to think of this final moment as you're picturing that final pendulum swing that has the most momentum, relevant to Star Trek Adventures, the most momentum behind it. It's breaking through all the barriers. The players are winning. And it could end up playing out very differently. So my favorite example of this is like the end of Star Wars: A New Hope. Sorry, it's Star Wars reference here on Star Trek Adventures podcast. But, the Death Star blows up. And the threat, throughout the movie is the Death Star is going to come around and blow up your planet. And so the final picture, if you're George Lucas, you're like, wow, they're going to blow up that Death Star. That's what I want to see. I want to see a World War II-esque fighter pilot, battle on the Death Star, and they blow it up. Now, what if your players decide not to do that? Okay, what if they say they want to infiltrate the Death Star and sort of do it commando style, lay explosives and get out just in time? Maybe some of them don't make it, etc. Actually, that actually sounds great. I'd love to see that movie. And then maybe I forget if this came up in the audience, but somewhere somebody had this idea that people could steal the Death Star.
Yeah,
And that
take
is
it
such
over.
a right. That is such a thing that would happen at the RPG table. Is like, Han, Luke, Chewie, Leia, and they literally end up somehow stealing that thing. And now they're on the run, and now the Empire has to destroy their Death Star, and that would just be wild. So, but if you can imagine that, okay, things need to culminate in this thing basically being destroyed or compromised.
You said
Then
it too in class, Josh. There was something you said. The point wasn't to destroy the Death Star when you're designing your game. It was to nullify the threat. And that can
right.
come in many forms.
So exactly. And what you can do is you can, if you feel very like inspired with a specific vision, you can write it down and then you can make it a little more blurry, right? Take it one step out of focus on, what is the emotional beat that encompasses the specific beat that you've imagined.
Yep. And the way I envisioned it when we were in the class, we put a target on the back wall and we said, this is the target
Yeah.
your module is trying to get to, is nullify this threat or save this group of people. It's not how they do it. This is what they're trying to do. But how they do it is up to the players. That's why it's collaborative storytelling. Right.
And it could even be a sort of thematic goal. You might say that I want to have really explored this theme of, of discrimination, or I might want to, like, for example, the Kobayashi Maru. That's a Star Trek module. I ran some players through the Kobayashi Maru, and I really did not care where they ended up, if they cheated, if they lost, if they won. I just wanted them to feel that feeling of the total challenge and powerlessness that you feel in the Kobayashi Maru, like so many iconic characters have had. So as long as that happened, that was my moment that I was going for, is when they were sort of broken down yet triumph in this, and it could look so many different ways.
So this sounds really reminiscent to writing advice about plotting versus pantsing, right? You got, even if you're writing a very, very, very light outline, at least have your end destination in sight, right? You can always change it later, right? You're not married to it, but having some sort of goal that you're writing to, whether you're writing into the dark and you're just throwing words on the page, at least you're going somewhere. It's like, setting up your GPS. You know where you're going to end up. You might take some detours here and there, and you might take another side route or something. But I don't know if it's within the scope of this conversation, but I would really love to pick your respective brains about what happens if a game master literally truly has no end goal in mind and just wants to throw stuff at the players and see what happens, right? If they go, okay, yeah, we're going to play Star Trek tonight, we're going to play Star Wars tonight, here's your starting point, we know we're all clear on the starting point, and then just go and see where it goes.
Yeah, that would be different than this. That would be a different class for me, because this is one. To me, this was one of our goals in this workshop, was to help them design dramatic stories that they could sell, that they could actually give, and multiple groups could play and have different outcomes. But that's called Captain's Log, what you just talked about, Jim. All right. So point number 2, once we talked about that target, we talked about the hero's journey, which is breaking the story into 3 acts. It's so common. It's one of the most used story, mechanisms for humans. So we said, let's go with this common story because people understand it. So the structure, you want to structure the story in a way that aligns with traditional narrative arcs, just because the broadest audience is going to get it. And so what we did is Act 1, right? You got 3 acts. So what happens in Act 1 in the hero's journey? You have the introduction of the characters in the setting. Oftentimes the non-player characters are introduced here. And the point, it's called the departure, meaning the hero leaves the familiar world. And what does that mean? Again, this is all over the internet. Easy, type in the hero's journey. But basically you have something upset this character's life. So maybe you think about Frodo Baggins, who wants to stay in the Shire and something has to pull him out of the Shire. Or Luke Skywalker, he wants to fly a jet and he wants to probably end up serving for the Empire. But wait a second, he ends up on a whole different side of that, right? So it's really unexpected. They think that their life is going to go this way and it goes that way. So that's Act 1, where you're introducing that to the characters, like, we just messed up your day. Something just screwed up your day. That moves into Act 2, where you have escalation of the conflict and challenges. This is where the hero faces trials and realizes that they don't have what it takes to solve this problem. they're missing something. And so, in Star Trek Adventures, I've talked about this a lot of times, Jim. This is where I create conflict all over the place. I dump my threat all over the place because I want the problems to get bigger and bigger, and I want the characters to be freaking out. Like, I don't know how we're going to solve this. I do tell people, have a little caveat. This is where you have a good session zero with your players, and you have to build that trust between game masters and players so they know that you're not just beating them down because you just want to do a total party kill. But you're saying, no, I'm doing this to create an epic story so that you all look good in Act 3. Okay, so that's where we go into Act 3, which is climax and resolution. So the hero by Act 3 has gained some sort of newfound wisdom. It could be a mentor. So Obi-Wan Kenobi was, Luke Skywalker's mentor. We talked our last show with Lou Anders a couple of weeks ago, Jim. We talked about, how Spock could be a mentor to Kirk at one point, but another time it could be Pike, a mentor. So that gives them the clue after they've been beaten down about, okay, this is what we're going to need to solve it. In Star Trek, it's something different. It could be scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge could be the mentor, the Federation database, or they're all the brilliant Academy graduates on that ship who take their collective knowledge and piece together, wait a second, we're going to need to invent a solution to take care of this monumental problem. That's how it often plays out in Star Trek Adventures, I notice. So again, you're going to break into those 3 acts that I just mentioned. You're not adding any of the problems yet. You're just figuring out in Act 1, these are going to be the characters and setting. Act 2, this is the escalation. This is how the problem is going to get really bad in Act 2. And in Act 3, they're going to have to solve it, going back to Josh's point, like this, or maybe like this, or maybe even a way I, as the game master, couldn't even imagine they would solve it. So we're not adding in the problems or conflicts yet. We're just building those 3 beats that we see common in the mission briefs.
I don't know about you guys, but sometimes those beats for me end up getting demarked by revelations. Like, I'll play a little mini game with myself that I'll say, okay, if they're investigating a cosmic entity, they're really not going to be able to find out what that entity is all about until Act 2. So, maybe the revelation of the nature of this thing is what pushes you into Act 2. I'm curious if that ever squares with you, like in terms of planning to withhold information. And that sounds a little, railroady, but it's almost erecting a challenge where they actually do find their way to that information, and that ushers in the next act.
And we talk about that in point number 4. So we're going to come back to that.
All right,
that point, Josh, is in point 4. We're going to get to that, how you make it, because you're designing an RPG. So yeah, I mean, the players have given up a little bit of reality and act like they don't know what's going on, or you don't even, as the game master, know what's going on. So yeah, we kind of know what direction they have to go into, but we're going to talk in point number 4 about how to set it up so that they feel like they're the winners on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just two thoughts while we're talking about this. Act 2, when you're escalating conflict, that's where I like to tailor any pre-written module or mission brief or whatever by adding in the character backstories. Like if the characters have an element, those always make for fun complications, right? Like, oh, you have an academy buddy that's done such and such. Oh, they show up. Oh, you got a family member that's having problems. They show up. You're having problems with your department, your junior department head or something. Yeah, they show up. They got another problem, and you're just adding more stuff on top of it. And Act 2 is a good place to do that, because then you're just adding even more texture and stuff, and you're also able to directly point at the stuff that the players have created for their characters, and you can just drag all that in and just make things worse and make things more exciting.
I love that. So you're saying basically with like Star Trek Adventures, that's where you would challenge their values. You would maybe hit them with their values in Act 2.
Good.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. I like to really have the players focusing on their values as much as possible, but especially Act 2, Act 3. I think are where they should. Those are the big climatic moments, right? We're building to that big climax, and I think some of the best Star Trek stories are when the characters get to that crisis point, right? And they're like, "Oh, now I got to pull in my values. Is this important enough to me to fight for it, or do I let it go, or like how does that change me, or whatever?" But yeah. And then
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, a nice thing about playing RPGs is that you often get a couple sessions to play through these stories. So you can go through session one and you've been through act one. And something that I've noticed my players tend to do is that they'll do a lot of value complications in act one. So they sort of know that we're going to explore some theme, and they'll start to kind of just make things harder for themselves. So they'll say, like, I think my character's really pissed off about this, or I think my character's really conflicted. He doesn't like this mission. And they'll deliberately put these complications out there, which I love. And that gives them some determination. But then that can then color act two, because I know that they've kind of bought into a certain class of problems. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves to step four, but basically you can sort of let act one, the players can kind of feel around and generate some stuff that you can then draw on. It might be values or otherwise in the next. It might be advantages. They might say, I want to get prepared for this kind of challenge. And they might create some advantages that are sort of like, they invent a device or they reconfigure the shield in a certain way. And then that can kind of point the way for, how you might make things dramatic building on that in the next act.
Yeah. You got to love the proactive players who are willing to throw stuff into the mix to hurt their characters without you even having to start, right? If they're already hurting themselves and you come into the start of the game, you're like, oh, that's even better.
Those are my favorite players. My favorite players are the people who step on their own toes. I love it.
Yeah. So nugget of gold players, be proactive, be willing to hurt yourself, because it's all part of the drama and part of the fun. The other comment I wanted to make just real quick is for the writers out there who may not be quite RPG but want to do writing, but even for the RPGers, there's some great research material out there. There are no shortage of books and essays and discussions and stuff online about the 3-act structure, even blowing it out to 5 acts, like the legacy Star Trek series were 5 acts in a teaser, partly because they have the commercial breaks and they had to deal with the commercial breaks. Screenwriting, of course, takes the 3-act structure and breaks it down into like multiple chunks depending on who you're reading. There's all kinds of pinch points and inciting incidents, and there's all kinds of stuff you can play with. But the core 3-act structure doesn't change. I mean, it's so good. We've been using it since before Shakespeare, so it's tried and true. And your players, even if they're just casually familiar with reading and storytelling, they'll get it.
That's right. Good. All right. So so just to review, we got the main target, we've got the 3-act structure that we built up, but then how do you get the heroes off their butt? Josh, you want to talk about that?
And so that's step number 3. So, and yeah, Michael, you've been calling this the fire, to light under the player's butt. And this is the inciting incident. And so many Star Trek stories have an inciting incident. Maybe I'll even focus more generally first. There's so many interesting Star Trek and Star Trek Adventure things to do with this, but more broadly in any RPG, you can have an inciting incident that just makes it absolutely compelling for your party of players to disrupt, to be disrupted in that first act and go on this adventure, go on this journey, take on this quest, go in search of the mystery, whatever it is. And the way that we put it in the workshop is that it really goes to your point from earlier, Jim, about that you may not know what players you have, especially if you're writing a published module. So you kind of have to have hooks that could work with anybody. And the way that I think of that is by almost making it so that it's like a news article that could be on the front page, right? So there's news articles, not nude articles, but news articles on like the business page and the sports page, and like some people like these. But this is an article that could make the front page news, right? So, and I thought about like in Indiana Jones 3, Henry Jones kidnapped on mission to get Grail from the Nazis or something. I mean, and there's a lot of people, people who are scholars would be into that. People who are adventurers would be into that. People who are against fascists would be into that. There's like a hook for everybody to sort of like get drawn in. And so if you can, obviously you need your session 0 to build some of the lore of your world, but if you can make that incident newsworthy, then that will really give each of them, and hopefully, you bonded and they're bought in, but it will give them material to work with and really pull their characters forward on this.
Yeah, for Star Trek Adventures, it's super easy. Why? Because if you're playing a Starfleet crew, that inciting incident is you just got orders. Obey your orders. But we understand that we were building this workshop too for other people that maybe were, going back to the cookie baking group. Their goal was to bake a cookie, and they had to do that for their friend's party. And so that's, it was a very mushier, softer kind of RPG. So of course everyone wants to bake cookies. So that was their inciting incident, was the directive to bake cookies. But it is important that you need to kind of you know, if you're at a convention, you know, people are sitting down to play a game. And so I've noticed at conventions, it's usually a little bit more pew pew because people tend to, it's a broad, so you're going to give them something that's so obvious that they have to fight the Klingons or the Romulans. But when you're building a module for games maybe that aren't pew pew, you really have to have a good moral compunction. Study your group, figure out what the moral compunction, or maybe a family or friend is hostage somewhere. You got to get that fire so they all want to go, even if it's just two of the characters have a problem and the other three says, okay, we'll support you so that you support us on our next problem. That's good motivation too.
Yeah, and Star Trek, specifically for Star Trek RPGs, I mean, if you just have watched the show, you've got an instant one built in, right? Almost every episode that I can think of. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of examples, but a personal log, captain's log, somebody's saying something to the viewer right at the very beginning, saying, "Oh, we were doing such and such, but when suddenly this other thing happened, and now we're going to go deal with this. Here's our mission. Here's our directive. Here's what we gotta go deal with." So that immediately should give the players something to immediately latch onto and say, "Oh, we're expected to go do this thing," whether they're Starfleet or not Starfleet, right? Because it could be a personal log from like a Ferengi salesman saying, "Oh, I'm going to this such and such a planet for this conference, and I'm going to sell, this." But then all of a sudden, this thing happened, and we've been diverted to whatever. So there's that, and then of course for Star Trek also, by and large, not every, but the vast majority of main characters we see in Star Trek, whether they're Starfleet or not, are people of action, right? They do stuff. They don't hang back and like think about what they're going to do, and they don't hem and haw, and they don't wonder what's going to. They're bold. They go do something, whether they're Klingon, Romulan, Ferengi, Starfleet, whatever. So I think that's an interesting challenge, and I'm sure that's a separate conversation entirely for game masters to kind of tease out their timid players, or their players that tend to hold back a little bit. Is like you can gently encourage them to be a little bit more bold and try stuff, right? Take risks, right? Risk is our business, as Kirk tells us.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Josh.
Well, I was just going to say something that is so fun about the system with this inciting incident is the supporting character mechanic. And I've seen you do this a lot, Michael, where you can literally have that teaser opening scene that has no character that's a main character, or some of the characters are main characters, but basically everybody gets to play somebody that's literally present for this inciting incident. I think of like the Praxis explosion in Star Trek 6. I think even of Kirk's birth in the Star Trek movie from 2009 or whenever that was. Mm-hmm. And basically you could populate one scene with a bunch of supporting characters, everybody's there, and you could just throw the pew pew at them. The rest of the adventure could be very, moral and diplomatic, but you could just explode things and just throw all your thread at the situation, all to basically establish the theme and the incident, and the players have a real stake, and it's just a total blast. Can't do that in every RPG.
True. Cool. All right, let's do one more on this show because to keep it rolling. Now we've talked about that 3-act structure before, and we have the inciting incident. But I'm going to give a super simple example, just so that we can. I'm going to go back to the cookie story because I just think it's so good. So imagine you're a bunch of little animals that live together or live in this forest, and your goal is to bake, cookies for your friend. You have to get the cookies done for your friends. It's an important party coming up. And so the target was do that cookie. So again, with Act 1, you introduce all the characters coming together. You can picture them putting on their aprons. They got all the ingredients there, and they're ready to do it. And all of a sudden they discover what's the first conflict? What's the first brick wall? They can't find the recipe book. Oh my goodness. So, what's going on? And not only can they not find the recipe book, but the oven's not working. Oh my goodness. So both the recipe book and it's missing, right? So we move into Act 2, and the goal is, what are they doing? They're searching for the recipe book and trying to figure out, like, well, how the heck are we going to actually, bake this without the oven and the recipe book? But they find the recipe book. So they find the recipe book in part 2. And when they open the recipe book, you know what's inside the recipe book as a bookmark? A wrench. And what's that wrench needed for? To fix the oven. Okay, so they go into Act 3, and they're going to go ahead and, now they're like, great, we're going to fix the oven. Oh my goodness, they don't have eggs. They don't have eggs. And you know what? In fact, the store is going to close off. And so it's a race to get to the store to get the eggs in order to bake those cookies. Okay, so you saw what we did. We had the 3 acts there that seems so simple, is that friends gather together. You get the recipe book. That's the next event you're supposed to do. And then you're supposed to bake the cookies. Well, you lost the recipe book. The oven's broken. You needed a wrench to fix it, and then you're out of eggs. So each one gets a conflict. Each one of those each one of those acts gets a conflict. That's simplistic in how I'm describing it, though I'm telling you it was super exciting when the lady was building it in the class. But likewise, what you're going to do is after you have your 3 act structures, translating this to Star Trek Adventures, you're going to start throwing conflicts at all those points. And that's actually how you build the excitement in the adventure. And as a game master, you're able to target in Star Trek Adventures your characters' values. You can target complications that make them shine because of their skills and the departments and their specialties that they have. But it's just that simple. So I tell people, I think the mistake many people make is they design this adventure like, oh, and then they're going to meet a dragon. Oh, and then they're going to fall down a pit. Oh, and then there's going to be a cave in. No, don't do that. Design your acts as if no problems happen. And now go backwards and now start throwing in all those complications, those brick walls. And that's where the conflict is going to happen. And you see the way we do it in Star Trek Adventures is we do it with optional encounters. I design optional encounters. So maybe there's 5 optional encounters, but maybe you only want to use 2 of those. And because of how your group is built. So that was point number 4 is add the inciting incidents after you've done, add the conflicts after you've already built the act structure without problems.
And so would you guys think also, is this a good place to talk about briefly getting into the weeds a little bit about like, starting off Act 1 with like difficulty 0, difficulty 1 tasks, just to start gradually ramping up, because you don't want to drop a difficulty 5 on them right away, because then there's nowhere to go, right? You got to build to the climax. You can't just climax and then just kind of like sit there. And then maybe Act 2, maybe start introducing an extended task or an extended challenge or something. Start adding some difficulty in there. Give them opportunities for some small successes along the way, but keep piling on the complications and the conflicts and the challenges and stuff, and then keep building it up.
Yeah, one thing we talked about is in Act 2, if you have a 5-person game, you're going to create maybe you're going to build 5 conflicts that are tailored to each player, and they have to split the party in order to do this. And now they have to piece all these things together to move toward Act 3. So or if you've just been piling on a lot of problems in Act 2, in Act 3 they all have to come together and put their brains together and spend all their momentum to handle this seemingly insurmountable obstacle. But yeah, you get to do what you want at that point. And I say I want to leave a lot of flexibility for the game masters there, because players are uber creative and they're constantly trying to screw your story up, right? And so you have to make them feel like they're collaborating with you, tug of war style with those conflicts.
It was funny listening to you recount the cookie story. And by the way, I mean, in the room we were all glued to that. Like there were so many crazy ideas in that room. There were ice zombies, but the cookies was really like, I think it was the coziness of the setting that it just a contrast to that. It was like, wait, no, these people can't have problems. They're perfect. They like leave them alone, But to a certain extent, that's how the Federation is, right? The Federation is actually cozy in a sense because they have this incredible technology. You have this starship. You can literally invent anything in Star Trek Adventures, right? So it's just like what you were saying, Michael. Some of these problems in Acts 1, 2, and 3 are literally just taking things away, right? They almost have this infinite anything machine. And then you're like, well, now you can't warp. Or actually, now the transporters don't work. You have to fly, right? Or now this person is out of commission, right? And you're someone else is going to have to step into that role. And so you can sort of see what elements, what kind of negative space can you create that then really gets their, builds the drama and then gets their creative juices flowing.
Yeah. And we'll talk next week more about that act two, and the psychology between that act two, because it's about making the players stressed and then making them feel like they are the most brilliant creatures on the planet, and there's a way to do that with finesse, because honestly, my players are, I don't have to fake it. I really literally just create problems for my team and they science their way out of it. And I just shake my head like, yeah, okay, that sounds good enough. Yeah. And that brings me joy, is watching their creativity. So next week, we're going to talk about that, building that threat at the end of Act Two, and then working toward the solution. And then what's really cool is we talk about foreshadowing, is how to go back and leave clues so that people feel super smart by the time they get to Act Three, right? Everyone's nodding their head.
Totally. And something I'm noting in the outline, Michael. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, everything sounds great. I'm agreeing with you. But then I remember we're on a podcast. I can't nod because nobody can hear me nod.
Right. Only 4 years. You figured it out. You figured it out tonight.
I get there. A slow learner.
Joshua, what were you going to say?
No, earlier we were talking about, some of the triggers between the acts, like especially that we're going to talk next time about, getting from Act Two into Act Three. But let's say getting from Act One into Act Two, where it's sort of like, okay, this is getting serious, and like you said, they realize that they don't have the tools yet to solve this problem. And you mentioned that, in item 4 here, where we come up with conflicts and brick walls for each act, that this is one of those places where you can put these triggers in place of what would push you into Act Two. What are the revelations? What did you not know? Now you realize that it's, the evil is way more powerful than you thought, or that it's in somebody that you didn't know, or something you thought was right is wrong. I'm wondering if you have any tips on the trigger that transitions you like from Act One to Act Two.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to a simple non-combat kind of situation, just so people how I would Act One, Act Two, something. Let's take like a Starfleet JAG hearing, where maybe your characters have to go to prosecute someone. You have all the papers on them. Everything looks good. You feel very confident about that in Act One. You're like, oh, it's in and out. It's going to be in and out. We had an ensign who was insubordinate, and it's in and out on this one. And we're here to we're really here just to decide what their punishment is. But then at the end of Act One, you find out that there's something inciting, like he was taken over by an alien, and he's claiming that an alien that you let on the ship, Captain. You let this cat on the ship, and I told you not to, and it made me do this, and I warned you about this. Wait, what's going on? Wait, did we do a mental health check on this person? Did they claim this? Oh, the doctor's records do show that he claimed, so I would then spin it, and all of a sudden you got everyone angry because now they thought they were going in for something easy, and now they're on the hot seat. So something like that is you're just twisting the story and adding some new truths in. That's the adventure right there. Right.
So you almost could pin some truths that you're really like, the moment that you bring those out is kind of when you move in.
Yeah, I want to pin some truths or very convincing lies. Or misunderstandings. Right. So even if like that's not true, sorry, I'm going to have evidence to show it is, and now this is an argue against evidence.
Oh, that's good. So that's like in that variant, the players would almost find out the truth in Act One. And then in Act Two, this is sort of like one of those situations where Harry Potter, like some administrator comes in and they're like, no, there's no evil. No, you're wrong. Like you're in detention, right? And then you're like, oh, you have this dread knowledge, but you can't do anything about it. Yeah.
I mean, who did it perfectly with Strange New Worlds when they put Ed Astra, Aspera, that episode, if anyone wants to see what they did there, you went in and you knew Una was wrong. Yeah, she's an Illyrian. She's wrong. They have everything on her that she's wrong. And the lawyer, who was excellently acted, there's no way out of this. But she built a case, like built a case to show how wrong Starfleet was. Like I thought that is the excellent show, one of the best lawyer shows I've ever seen. JAG shows for Starfleet. And again, no pew pew at all, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time.
Yeah,
Yeah, good.
Just to close up that bit, transitions from Act 1 to Act 2 and Act 2 to Act 3. I always like dropping in reveals or a little twist, or here's what the characters knew, but all of a sudden you turn it on its head, and then they don't know what. Now they're like, oh wait a minute, now they're kind of hooked to continue on into Act 2. I mean, you get this in all kinds of writing too. You want to kind of like set the I forgot what it's called. It's the you have a lock that has a hook and a keyhole. You set the keyhole and you get the hook, and you get that hook drags them right into Act 2. And it's always a fun place to throw the players for a loop, so that if you do it well, your players go, oh, what? And then they're like, oh, now we got to continue. And that's either where you stop for the night or you take a break and then you come back to it, and they're all revved up, ready to jump into it.
Perfect time to segue to our hook for next week. So everyone stay tuned. We're going to skip gratitude this week because we're going to have it next week. So this is the hook. Come back so that we can finish this off and show you how to build your dramatic RPG story. All right. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. We'll see you next time.